If I do, so there we go. All right, welcome everybody to this meeting of Nestrans. The joys of IT, it's great when it works, but like many things, absolutely lousy when it doesn't. But anyway, the sun's shining and hopefully Sandra will be able to join us in a moment. So we'll get the show on the road and as Sandra indicated, Mark Masson will take us through the housekeeping and that will include the roll call. So I'll stop talking and hand over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Councillor. So good afternoon. This is a reminder that the meeting will be recorded and will appear on the Nestrans website soon after. Members of the board can leave their cameras on but switch off their microphones until they wish to speak. Others participating should switch their microphones and cameras off until the chair brings you into the meeting. Those observing today's proceedings should have their cameras and microphones switched off at all times. If members wish to speak, please press the raise your hand icon on the Teams toolbar, but remember to switch it off after the chair brings you in. I will now start the recording and undertake a roll call to identify those in attendance. So we know that Councillor MacDonald is in attendance, but she's going to just join us again shortly. Councillor Argyle?
Yes, I'm here.
Dr. Bochel?
Yeah.
Councillor Aitchison?
Present.
I've got apologies for Councillor Bell. Councillor Carr?
I'm here. Afternoon.
Councillor Cox?
Present.
Councillor Hutchison?
Yep.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Present.
Colin Allenach?
Here.
Jerry Donald?
Present.
And Ian Ross?
Present.
Thank you. I'll now hand you back to the Vice Convener, Councillor Argyle.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome to everybody again. Okay, next item then, declarations of interest. Is there any declarations of interest? Could you please indicate? There are none. That's fine. Which takes us on to 1.2 on the agenda, which is the minute of the board meeting of the 9th of June. Firstly, in terms of accuracy, if anyone has any issues regarding accuracy, could they indicate? Otherwise, I will take it as an accurate record. Okay. Rob, are there any matters in the minutes we need to pick up on at this stage?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing in particular other than I think it does say at one point that we will ask for a meeting with Mr. Day, the new Transport Minister. Just to say that a letter did go to Mr. Day's office, and in the short term we were offered a one-to-one between the chair and Mr. Day. He was keen to go around the chairs of all 7 regional partnerships and have short meetings. So Sandra MacDonald and myself and Paul Finch met with Mr. Day a week ago today, and we can maybe pick that up under the director's report in terms of a very brief outline of what was discussed. Okay,
no, thanks for that. I'm sure Mr. Day has quite a lot of people he needs to meet in the first instance, but we can still continue to look for a meeting for him to come join us at the board at some point before he gets moved on to another job. Okay, let's move on to the next item then, which is budget matters, and Alan Smith, Chris Smith, sorry, Chris, got your name wrong. Chris Smith is here to take us through the first of those, the budget matters item. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. This report is the standard revenue and capital budget report and is providing an update as at 31st of August 2021. Main points to note are that per Appendix 1, whilst expenditure is currently low compared to budget, the forecast remains on budget. This position will continue to be reviewed and updated as necessary as we progress through the financial year and reported to the board as appropriate. Secondly, there are a number of environments per Appendix 2 following on from the receipt of funding from the Scottish Government for the Business Partnership Fund, and also a number of project-specific variances that have also resulted in a number of requirements that require approval. The report also provides quite a detailed update on a number of grant funding streams for noting, namely Sustrans, the Regional Transport Active Travel Grant, and the Local Rail Development Fund. Vice Chair, there are 4 recommendations for the board per the report. That's to note the monitoring and forecast position per Appendix 1, approve the environments as detailed in Appendix 2, note the project updates relating to external funding, and to note the continuing Strategic Transport Fund position. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you for that. Yeah, everything seems to be on track, and the environments are there for us to consider as well, and the recommendations are on page 13. So, are there any questions for Chris at this point, first of all? No. Is anybody not happy to go with the recommendations in that case? Okay, then the recommendations are approved. Thank you very much. That's very straightforward, very clear report, and that makes life a lot easier. Thank you for that. Which takes us on to the next item, which is the annual accounts and the report by the external auditor, who I'm happy to say is with us here this afternoon. So, Anne MacDonald, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm going to refer to the second pack of papers. Sorry, so just in case you've got them a different way from me. So the accounts and the auditor's report came out as a pack. So if there's confusion with the page numbers, I apologise for that. So the audited accounts are in your packs at pages 5 to 52. And my report starts at page 53 of your papers. And this particular page, it contains a letter showing the position of the audit when the papers were released to the board last week. So at that point, the audit largely complete. Paragraph 9, there's a couple of matters still in progress, and I'll come to those in a bit more detail shortly. The letter of representation at the second bullet will be signed alongside the audited accounts, and a copy of that draft letter is included in your papers as Appendix B. So this is a standard stage in the conclusion of any audit when we seek signed management assurances on the completion of on the completeness of the disclosures in the annual accounts. And at bullet 3, I can confirm that our final testing has been completed and there's no matters arising in that particular issue. At Appendix A, this sets out the proposed audit opinion for the accounts, and this is an unqualified audit opinion. Moving on to page 63, we set out our annual audit report. So this brings together our findings across the whole of the audit as well as the annual accounts. And in line with our audit plan we shared with you earlier in the year, our report provides assurances on the governance arrangements, and we have no areas of concern to draw to your attention in that regard. The main focus today, however, will be my findings in relation to the audit of the 2021 annual accounts, and this commentary starts on page 69 of your papers. So first of all, turning to Exhibit 1, we set out there a reminder of the materiality levels that we set for the audit, and this is the level of identified error which could be permitted within the accounts without it impacting on the audit opinion. So just a reminder that that figure was 67,000. Exhibit 2 sets out the 4 significant issues arising from the audit which I wish to draw to your attention. At item 1, this relates to the accounting for the general fund. And board members may recall that it's only been in recent years that legislation has permitted the partnership to hold a general fund. So it's still quite new in accounting terms. Just as a reminder, the annual accounts includes 5 primary statements. So that's expenditure and funding analysis, the income and expenditure account, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, and the movement in reserves fund. And my opinion on the accounts it makes specific issue to each of those 5 statements, and you'll find those 5 statements in your papers at pages 22 to 28 of the accounts. So while there's no impact on the budget outturn figures that you'll have considered throughout the year and the final outturn for the year, there were material misstatements in the disclosure of the transactions relating to the general fund balance across 4 of the 5 primary statements within the accounts. But as a result of the audit, these have been corrected in the revised papers, in the revised accounts that you have within your papers today. So linked with those misstatements, we've recommended that the management arrangements are reviewed to ensure that there's proper review and sign-off in future on those technical issues within the accounts before they're submitted for audit. The second issue in Exhibit 2 relates to the pension liabilities. So these figures are provided annually by the actuary for the purposes of the accounts, and there's been a significant increase in the liability this year compared with the previous year. Every 3 years, the actuary undertakes a detailed valuation for the pension fund, which reviews the funding level of the fund and sets the contributions for employers for the next 3 years. This valuation is then rolled forward by the actuary in the intervening years for accounting purposes. A full valuation was undertaken as of 31st of March 2020. And so this is the first year after that valuation, and it's not unusual after a valuation to have a significant adjustment in the accounts to reflect the changes from that last valuation. So this adjustment this year is the reason for the increase in the liability, and it's arisen because of an impact in the changes at director level last year. And because the majority of the change is due to a specific event rather than a difference in actuarial assumptions, it may be necessary for us to restate the prior year figures as it was in 1920 that the changes in director took place. So at this stage, while I'm happy with the level of the liability stated in the balance sheet, I've not quite reached a conclusion on whether the prior year figure should be restated. We do take assurance from the actuary and we work closely with them. And in reaching a conclusion on the accounting, I still need some further information from the actuary on the process and the assumptions that they've used. And I would hope to have that resolved over the next day or so. So just for board members' information, then the figures will either stay exactly as they are in the papers that you have today, or we'll restate the previous year figures. But we'll still end up with the same liability reported at 31st of March 2021. So it's just about moving a bit of this year back into last year, but the end figure at 31st of March will remain the same. So that's still a work in progress, but I'll report back on that. And the third item relates to the Civitas funding. This has been the final year of the project, and so there's been a final claim submitted. And we've now largely there in confirming that the income and expenditure associated with this project as reported in the accounts is in line with the final claims submitted for funding. And while I still have some final queries with officers, the amounts involved are not significant enough to affect the audit opinion, so I can conclude on that matter. The final matter raised in Exhibit 2 relates to going concern considerations. And the balance sheet, as it is most years with Nestrans, is showing an excess of liabilities over assets because of those pension liabilities I've referred to. We don't, however, in this case regard this as a major concern because the pension liability is an accounting entry, it's a technical issue, and the underlying cash commitments are met through employer contributions on an ongoing basis. So, Chair, I'm proposing that the accounts are approved today with the pension disclosure item pending. I'll provide an update by email on the outcome of that before the signature, but because I don't have concerns about the final position, I would still be suggesting that approval is given today. As last year, the accounts will be signed electronically, and I'll be aiming to put arrangements in place to enable the signature to go ahead this week. And as a reminder, the accounts are signed by the Chair, the Director, and by the Treasurer. Thank you, Chair. I do realise that the issues are raised are really of a technical accounting nature, but they are still significant in relation to the accounts. Hopefully my explanations have been clear. Happy to take any further questions. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Anne. That's a very, very clear presentation of what is actually a very clear report. Clearly raises a number of issues that we do need to consider. and we have clear recommendations in the papers here that we agreed to sign the annual accounts, and you're happy for that to be done and to consider your report. So thank you for that. I'll just pause, open it up firstly for any questions from colleagues. And if there aren't any questions, I'll maybe just go over to the director to see if there's anything he wants to say at this stage. So first of all, any questions on Anne's report? No. Okay, Rab, I'll give you just a chance. If you'd like to come in with anything from the management side, as it were, not side, because that sounds confrontational, but you know what I mean.
Thanks.
With your director's hat on, let me put it that way. Right.
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add at all. We are working with Anne on a number of matters, such as the Civitas funding, just to try and draw a line under a few minor items, and we'll hope to do that as soon as that's possible to get done.
That's great. It looks like everybody is content with where we are, so that's fine. And thank you very much. It's nice to see you again, even remotely. It's good to see you. The recommendations are that we approve the accounts for signature, and as Anne has said, subject to final clarification on the pensions issue. We've considered the report and note that the accounts can be accessed and so on. I will put forward those as a recommendation. If anyone is not happy, will they please indicate? Well, not so minded, I think, is probably the correct language. Okay, that's fine. We have unanimity there. So that's great. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks again, Anne, for that, and Rab, and we'll move on. If I can get back to my agenda, sorry, I'm having to leap about a bit here, but we'll get there in a minute. No, it's not going to open, of course.
Chair, if I can help, I think it's me. I
think it's you next, isn't it? Yeah, I was just watching this thing. I was so busy cursing the computer, I wasn't thinking about what actually is coming next, but it is.
Right. Item 3.1 on page 47 is director support. A number of meetings ongoing since the last meeting of board. I've included for information the appendix, which shows the steering group minutes of the Health and Transport Action Plan meeting on the 25th of June and on the 27th of August. And I also wanted to bring to members' attention the meeting of the Bus Alliance on the 25th of August. So I think significant progress on many of these areas. I also mentioned that the chair, myself and Paul Finch had met with Mr. Day, the new Minister for Transport, on the 8th of September. It was a little late for including an update in the report itself, but I think it is very fair to say that it was a very amiable meeting. He knows the North East quite well. He was very positive about some aspects, not least travel through Aberdeen Airport to Aberdeen Bus Station to Aberdeen Station and onwards. So he was very positive, and I think it would be fair to say he is really keen to work with us and to hear what we're up to in the future. In particular, he offered to come if there were opportunities to see things on the ground. So I think it was very much an initial meeting, but nevertheless, I think worthwhile in terms of a getting to know you. He now knows a little bit about Nestrans, and I think he knows where we are and what we're pushing for. So happy to take any questions on any aspects of the director's report, but it's very much just an update for members' information. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, Rab. I had a meeting with a different hat on with Mr. Day as well, just after the announcement of the arrangement between the SNP and the Greens. So, as you say, he knows a lot about us up here, which is a positive. Maggie, Dr. Bockel.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we'd also attended the Aberdeen International Airport Consultative Committee which was a relatively good news story considering what they've been going through. So increase in passenger volume numbers, as you'd expect. TUI now flying to Palma, might go to Tenerife. Stuff happening in the retail air side. But what's particularly interesting, I think, was this, that they're working on the sustainability strategy and aiming to achieve net zero emissions sometime in the future, not just looking at their own operations, but also theirs of the operators. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes in due course.
No, thanks, Maggie. No, good point. Okay, are there any questions for Rab, for the director, on his report? No, in that case, if there are no questions, we'll note the report with thanks to Rab for it, and we'll move on to the RTS Strategy 2040 update. And Kirsty, this is your pigeon, I think.
It is. It is.
You know
Thank
it
you.
inside and out, so we'll hand over to you.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, hopefully. It's primarily an update report, really, on where we are with getting the strategy approved. I think just following the last board meeting, we got comments back from Transport Scotland, so we've gone through a process of addressing all of those. We've submitted that back to Transport Scotland. The report says that we're still awaiting that feedback from them, but just last week we did get confirmation that they are happy that we have positively responded to their comments, which is what they said. They've got nothing substantive to flag at this point. They are, however, just checking in with their policy team, and although they don't foresee anything substantial coming out of that, we're anticipating they might ask us just to make some factual changes on things maybe like the A96 that have coming through. You know, things have moved on since we wrote it, so they may ask us to make some tweaks just to sort of reflect the factual position, but they have said that they don't anticipate anything substantial, so that's really good. We're working on the graphic version now, got that back, and just making sure all the full stops are in the right place and whatnot, and we've agreed with Transport Scotland that we will submit a final version of the strategy back to them at the end of September with a covering report saying, please approve this, please approve. And they've agreed that about 4 weeks to the end of October would give them enough time to turn that around, and then we'll be able to bring that back to November board as a final strategy for adoption. So that's the expectation. The report also just feeds back. We had a workshop back in August around about monitoring and evaluation. So there's a minute of the workshop for those who weren't there. And I've just summarised, I think, what we went through at the workshop in terms of our proposals for monitoring and evaluation going forward, and splitting it really into a sort of two-tier approach of key headline indicators on an annual basis and a 3-year evaluation report, which would split out. We'd currently do a very long list of 48 indicators every year, so it would split it out, make it a bit more easily digestible on an annual basis, and then give us a bit more room to do more of an qualitative evaluation, bring in things like lived experience and other data or consultation that we've done on a 3-year basis. So we're proposing that the first one of those would be, if we get this adopted in November, we can slot back into our previous time frame for producing monitoring reports, which is usually around about spring, which means we can take on board the Scottish Transport Statistics. So that would be spring next year for the first annual report, and then 3 years following that, so spring 2024 for the evaluation report. So the recommendations really just to note the progress towards the adoption of the RTS, to agree the new approach for monitoring and evaluation, and we also discussed targets at the workshop, and we're just still working on those, taking on board the feedback, and we'll bring those back to November. And happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Kirsty. That's perfect. I'll just see if there are any questions first of all on that. Don't see any questions. There we go. Very clear report, and thank you for that. And good progress actually, considering that there's been a degree of change, shall we say, in Edinburgh, and if we can negotiate that particular patch and come through. And get the thing sent off at the end of September and get it back by the end of October, which would be wonderful if that happens. And then we can adopt it in November. That sounds really good to me.
On the home stretch.
Yes, absolutely. And a huge amount of work's gone into it, and you've led that, Kirsty, so thank you very much for that. So the recommendations then are on page 64. We're being asked to note progress, which I think we can certainly do. Agree the new approach to monitoring and evaluation that Kirsty's outlined, and request that the final list of indicators and so on brought back in November. So if we put those recommendations on the table, if anyone's not minded to accept them, could they please say so now? I will take silence in that case as absolute consent. So thank you very much. And Kirsty, again, thank you. There's a huge amount of work you put into it and it is appreciated. And we look forward to November.
Me too. Thank you.
Fingers crossed. Great stuff. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to the STPR, talking about things happening in Edinburgh. STPR 2, other national transport policy developments. And Paul, you've come onto my screen. I think that must mean you must be doing it.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I couldn't remember who it was, but you've answered the question without me asking it. So pure genius. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. And I guess right at the front of this item, I'll just say that unfortunately, during the compilation of the public pack, there were a few gremlins snuck in, and that was pretty much on my watch. So apologies to the board and to the board members for that element. And this has also affected this paper, and that the two appendices to this paper have just got sort of misaligned. And when I refer to Appendix 1, they're actually on pages 81 to 107, and Appendix 2 actually is before that on pages 73 to 80. And in fact, going through the compilation of the public report just reminds me how normally we get it right, and on this occasion it just didn't quite manage. But anyway, so the report talks about two things. There's the progress of the Strategic Transport Project Review 2, which is being progressed, probably more by our Transport Scotland colleagues in Glasgow, but right enough in that respect. And I guess we've had a flurry of recent meetings with the team progressing this. STPR is setting out the national programme for investment in transport nationally over the next 20 years. And I guess three elements of information which I thought was important to share with the board is their programme, and that we're expecting a publication of information at the end of the calendar year. Then they're going to go into a 12-week sort of statutory consultation period on those prior to closing that. And I guess that timescale has been pretty much driven by the pre-election periods for the local elections. So just something to what we need to be aware of when that's going to be published. The next update is around the options that they're appraising for the North East, and they're broadly as what we recommended to appraise when we did the work on the strategic transport appraisal and the regional transport strategy. When you look at the two lists, what they're appraising and what we recommended in the strategic transport appraisal, they pretty much match. So that is in terms good news, I guess, for the amount of work that's been done. Of course, that is no guarantee that just because they're assessing those options, all those options will be taken forward for some form of recommendation, and we will have to wait and see. And I guess the noise is coming out if they're paying a lot of attention to climate change, the target they have for private vehicle kilometre reduction, impacts of COVID, and the policy context they set out in the National Transport Strategy. The third element is around, they've provided some feedback to some the comments that we provided as a board back to them. I think it was February, March time. Again, I've published that in full in Appendix 1. Quite a lengthy range of responses, but I thought it was important just to make that public in terms of the responses we got. So that's where we are with STPR2, and you can be assured that myself and Rab are actively involved both regionally and nationally trying to give the best advice to Transport Scotland and their consultants on the needs of the North East. Just moving on, the next item covered in this paper is the recent agreement that's been published and actually now agreed between the Scottish Government and the Scottish Green Party. They call it the Shared Policy Programme. A few things to pull out of this agreement, which I think I've provided a link to in the papers. First of all, that there are a couple of new portfolios at Scottish Minister level, and that there is an additional minister supporting Michael Matheson and transport. Obviously got Graham Day reporting to Michael Matheson. We also now have Patrick Harvey looking after active travel. So that will be interesting to see how that dynamic works. We've got an active travel minister and a transport minister, and hopefully the two of them will be able to work together, and we will be able to work with both of them going forward. Two issues particularly important for the North East is the sections all about the A96. It is interesting when you look at this shared policy agreement, the amount of words and attention focus actually on the North East. The rest of Scotland hardly gets a look in. It's all about the North East of Scotland, interestingly. But in terms of the A96, they've recommitted to bypassing Inverurie, committed to public transport, active travel, improvements, connecting communities. But importantly, they've undertaken a review of the full dualling programme. And we don't know the scope of that. We don't know the timings of that yet, but it's there. Secondly, there is interest in rail, particularly rail north of Aberdeen on a new line, the Dice to Ellen and beyond into Buchan area. We've discussed at board already the stakeholder interest in that, perhaps popularised also by the Campaign for North East Rail. We're interested in what STPR2 says about that, and the fact that we actually had Rab and Kelly met actually the Campaign for North East Rail on Monday and had a very constructive meeting going forward as well, which was good to hear. Actually, a very sensible conversation by all accounts on the different opportunities that might be presented there. And I guess we have the recommendations here. Recommendation is to note the progression of STPR2, and then there's another recommendation which was just to note the North East transport implications coming from this shared policy agreement. Including proposals for reviews of the future of the A96 dualling, and also the feasibility of a rail link between Dice and Ellen. And I guess if it's appropriate, Vice Chair, I would actually add to that recommendation just to say, and further north to Peterhead and Fraserburgh, just to more accurately reflect what it actually says in that deal. So I guess that's my commentary on the report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Paul. There's a huge amount in there, and that's really helpful to get that summary from you. So thank you very much for that. Clearly, with the deal, the two issues you've highlighted, the A96 and how that's going to progress, I don't think any of us can even begin to guess at the moment what's going to come out of that review. But we will be watching it with interest, especially what's meant by bypassing Inverurie, which is one of those interesting expressions that could be interpreted in different ways. And it's certainly very welcome to see that the railway side of things, the Dice Ellen and Northwards, has been picked up as part of that deal, not without its challenge, but at least it gives support to the position that Nestrans has had all along, which is that this is something that needs to be considered and kept there as a potential project. And I'm just would welcome the fact that that there has been a conversation with the campaign group as well, and we need to keep that dialogue going, and that's all good stuff. Enough from me. I see Councillor Carr. George, you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Paul, for your comprehensive summing up of a fairly lengthy document. I was just wondering if there's any mileage in being able to accelerate some of the smaller projects in there. These are pretty important to our communities, like the 20-mile-an-hour zones in residential areas, safe routes to school. I don't know where all the councils are on these sort of things, but certainly we've got quite a few of those resonating through the communities. We would like to see some quicker progress. And the other point is electric charging points and so on around villages. There are issues about reliability. I know Aberdeenshire's been moving in terms of suppliers on that, but These are the sort of things that are important to people today. And we've got some big macro projects there, which are great, and we need to be doing that, and we'll await to see where we can get with those. But I'm more interested in some of the smaller things that we can maybe accelerate and make a difference to people's lives, because these are the things that are coming up at the community council meetings that I attend. So if we could do make some progress on those. Just like to know what your comments are. Thanks, Chair.
No, I think, George, I will just comment that this paper is actually about the Scottish Government's strategic transport projects reviews. So it is by nature those big ticket items that are being looked at on a national basis. So I don't think that really filters down to 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and things of that kind. But I will let Paul answer, but it is slightly wider the subject matter, George. I will caution you on that. But
Yeah,
Paul,
thanks,
something in there you want to pick up on?
I always take a liberty.
Yes, and I shall exercise my right of restricting your liberty, but I shall be very kind and let Paul answer you this once.
Thank you, Councillor Carr, and thank you, Vice Chair. There are the 3 points that Councillor Carr has raised. 20-mile-an-hour zones. I think the regional transport strategy is supportive in principle of 20-mile-an-hour zones, but on this particular issue, I understand that the 2 local authorities are taking a particular interest, and I believe that there have been recent considerations. Infrastructure Services Committee at Aberdeenshire Council, if not, Ewan can correct me. Safer routes to school. Again, it's an important issue, and I think Nestrans RTS will be supporting the their local authority partners in these matters. We all want to see these sorts of effective programmes delivered. Again, I think it's more for the local authorities to tackle the detail of it, although Nestrans will be happy to provide the wider policy context for doing so and disseminating best practice in how it can be done. It is interesting that Safer Routes to School is a long established programme and policy, and it'd be interesting to see where we can go next with that. And the third point was electric charging points. I think how Nestrans can work with people like Energy Savings Trust and Transport Scotland to really facilitate the rollout of electric vehicles is going to be key to some of their decarbonisation objectives. And I do see that the Transport Scotland have recently got a new supplier, which filters down to the comment you made already about the new suppliers to hopefully improve some of the maintenance and upkeep of some of the charging facilities that are publicly available, which is going to be so important. I would also add to that another challenge is trying to support people who don't have a driveway, so these private suppliers, which again is going to be a coming issue, and I can assure you that national bodies are also looking at such issues. So, yeah, valid points across the board. A lot of them probably more valid at a local authority level, but again, I think Nestrans will be keen to support where we can.
Thanks, Chair.
No, that's fair enough, Paul. I mean, we are both local authorities and Nestrans are a 3-legged stool. It's been said before. We're all working in the same direction for the same objectives. And certainly there's a lot of work going on in Aberdeenshire around 20-mile-an-hour zones. Huge focus on that, and I'm sure the same is true of the city. But George, don't be naughty again, okay? I'll let you off this once. Are there any other questions on this paper rather than general questions about transport? Okay. We have the recommendations in that case, with thanks to Paul for a very comprehensive summary of an interesting stage in proceedings, but we're being asked to note the progress being made and note the North East transport implications, and as Paul indicated, adding to the second recommendation northwards to Peterhead. So if everyone's happy with that, we can agree. If anyone's not minded, okay, those recommendations are agreed. Paul, thank you very much for that. Which takes us on to the Bus Partnership Fund update. Not sure who's doing this one. Kirsty, you've suddenly appeared on my screen. It must be you.
Yeah.
It's great. I love this arrangement. Quite good. Over to you.
Thank you. primarily an update again. I think most board members or all board members are aware that we were successful in our bid to the Bus Partnership Fund, but looking back through papers, this is the first opportunity we've had to actually formally report that. So it's in there, and again, I've provided a background of what the vision and the aim of all of that was. I've also included what we've been awarded. We've been awarded just over 12 million. 10 million of that is for bus priority enabling works on sites, the South College Street improvements. Now, that's in there. Transport Scotland will be very clear in their award, however, that is very conditional on that enabling bus priority. It's a bus priority fund, so they have awarded us that money, but we need to demonstrate that that is in turn enabling bus priority measures in the city centre, and that's they've been quite strong on that. We've also got 1.4 million for stag and outline business case development on this in the city centre and the corridor studies that we're undertaking, and also within that money to develop the concept of the business case for Aberdeen Rapid Transit, which, as you'll know, is a key part of the RTS. There's also some money in there for comms and engagement. Really, the sort of, I think what we've been visiting is that message of ART and that step change improvement and what we're trying to achieve longer term, and project management. This was all subject to a report to the City Council's City Growth and Resources Committee in August. So I've included a link to that, and I've covered just some of the key things that have come out of that as well, which was around governance arrangements. The agreement has been that existing governance arrangements are appropriate at this point for the fund award, with projects that are mostly already approved and in progress. So the existing committee structures, the Nestrans Board, the Bus Alliance are all already in place and are appropriate for the decision-making process. What we've added to that is a Bus Partnership Fund working group, which I've just summarised the remit of that. Really, it's bringing the partners all together to keep an overview of the fund delivery, to monitor the progress and to ensure consistency with all of the other work streams that are going on, particularly the work in the city centre, Union Street, the low emission zone, and also to develop and monitor the project programme and financial monitoring. So that has been established, and we're currently, initially we're meeting fortnightly, but that will now meet on a monthly basis and report into the Bus Alliance board, and then in turn the Nestrans Board. The main first piece of work was a development of a project plan. That was a requirement within 2 months of the award, so that has been done and focuses on those key work streams that we've got the funding for. Most projects contained within the award are already in progress. The multimodal corridor studies, which Nestrans have started funding, will now transfer over to the Bus Partnership Fund. And Nestrans are leading on the Aberdeen Rapid Transit stream of work. So there's a summary here where we've put out a tender and undergone a tendering exercise, the scope of which really is for that case for change, preliminary options appraisal, moving into the detailed options appraisal and business case development for Aberdeen Rapid Transit to really make the case and to take that forward. As I said here, the tendering exercise was underway, and that's now been completed and is now subject. There's a separate report at the end of the agenda, an exempt report, which with some recommendations on that. So for this report, the recommendation really is just to note the success of the fund and the progress to date in developing the project plan, which has been submitted, and the establishment of the governance arrangements. And then I think recommendation 3 then falls under that exempt report at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. So we're really just looking at the first 2 recommendations on this report, and we'll pick up the third one when we get to the last item on today's agenda. Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, first of all, what a tremendous success. Really pleased to see that we collectively, because a lot of people involved in that, so that bid was successful, and we'll be looking to see how that goes. And I think it's particularly exciting now that we can start really doing some work on Aberdeen Rapid Transit, which I think could be a real game changer for the city, and a really very, very good thing indeed. Thank you. Are there any questions, first of all, or comments on this item? Maggie first, and then Ian.
Yes, I think Sandra had wanted to amend the first recommendation to also note appreciation of everybody. I know you've just said it, but it was just to kind of formally record that as part of the recommendation.
You're quite right. Thank you. Yes. Yes. If Mark, if you're when you're writing up the minute, if you could pick up that point, that'd be good. Ian Ross.
Yes, just interesting to see that the 10 million described as a quick win delivery, getting College Street there. And Kirsty emphasised the need to demonstrate the bus element. I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, please.
Sure. So the College Street improvements is a scheme that's already obviously in progress to be delivered. So we put that in because in order to deliver bus priority in the city centre, you need the South College Street scheme to divert that traffic out of the city centre. So the case was made to include that so that we can then look to deliver bus priority around sort of Guild Street, Bridge Street, Market Street, that kind of the core city centre area. So they have said yes to that funding as part of the Bus Partnership Fund, but they want to see that we are progressing those other bus priority elements as part of that package, and that's where the tie-in between the Bus Partnership Fund and the work that's ongoing through the city centre master plan all needs to come together as one sort of a big package. But it's I guess a mechanism of funding that so that we can then deliver additional bus priority in the city centre.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay. No.
You're on mute, Peter.
Sorry. I'll start again. Any other questions or comments on this paper? No. So in that case, two recommendations. The first two are on page 111 and 112. So just the first two recommendations, I'll put those forward for approval. If anyone doesn't want to note both of them, please say so. Good. Thank you very much. And the minute can reflect the change to the first recommendation, which is not just to note, but to applaud the success, or appropriate wording in proper committee speak. Okay, thanks very much. We'll move on then to the next one, which is 4.2, and this is the active travel study for the A944, a really interesting piece of work. And Rab, is it you this time?
Thanks, Chair. I think I've popped up on your screen this time as the Chair. Welcome back, Sandra. Item 4.2, is the results or the outcome from a consultancy study on active travel between Kingswells and West Hill. The consultants have undergone a major piece of work over a year or more, and it involved significant engagement both with users, community groups and stakeholders. The full report is now available on the Nestrans website and focuses really on three key options. One is the online route, which is a major upgrade to the existing Kingswells to West Hill cycle path, and two separated, segregated routes, either north or south. Both of these would include a new overbridge over the AWPR, and as we can imagine, that has significant and substantial costs attributed to it. The options that are coming out vary between about 3.7 million to about 8 million for a basic bridge. And then there are options which were also looked at in terms of iconic bridges, which would be something a bit more special, and gateway type statement bridges, which are really pushing the cost up into the realms of, I think I used the phrase, eye-watering. However, we think that it's worthwhile taking forward the three options into the more detailed multimodal study, which is currently ongoing, just been kicked off. So looking at the entire corridor between West Hill and Aberdeen City Centre on both the 944 and the A9119. So the recommendation is that we put the consultants' results as they stand into that wider package of consideration for the corridor as a multimodal study. Happy again to take any questions, Chair.
That's better. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Sandra asked if you could hear me, but I was muted when I asked the question. But if you can hear me now, then I will happily hand you back the chair and you can take us on from here.
To be honest, Peter, I would be very grateful if you could just continue. I'm on my phone. I have had some excellent help from our IT department, but if you were able to do that, that would be very much appreciated. I did have a question on this one though, and it was around on page 116. I just wondered, there's two phrases there that I wasn't sure what they meant. One was raised tables, and the other was public utilities. And I just wondered, you know, on the second item, what sort of public utilities were we considering in the designs? Thanks.
Yep, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Not sure of the absolute technicality, but raised tables, I would think, would be a form of traffic calming. So the not speed bumps, but the larger ones, which are more in 2 dimensions. So I think that's what we'll be talking about as raised tables. In terms of public utilities, I guess it's all the aspects of telecoms and waterworks, etc., which would be within the carriageway, quite often within the footway or cycle path. So they would need to be taken into consideration and can sometimes be quite a costly aspect of looking at upgrading paths.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks. Colin, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Rob. That's a good summary of the report. That's excellent. Just from my point of view, what's the start to the timescales after this? You know, I mean, we've just done the study, which everybody was thinking would go into like a detailed design after that, or a choice in a detailed design and actually getting something built. But now seems like it's going in. This is just feeding into another study and probably more consultations. So you can understand that publicly there might be frustration about that delay. Is there anything we can publish on a time scale for looking through this, and when we might actually see some progress on something that people can use as for active travel?
Thanks, Colin. It's a really good point, actually, because this study has been probably dragging on. Wouldn't be unfair to say. The multimodal study has been kicked off, and so it should be one that can be done in quite a short period of time. I would certainly be hoping within the next 6 months or so, presumably this financial year, if that's possible. So we'll get a full report back. City Council are leading on the multimodal study. It would need to go to city committees, but we can bring it back to Nestrans early in the new year as well, I would have hoped. And then construction, as you say, I mean, the key really isn't about when the study's done, but when something could actually happen on the ground. And I think there is a real movement and a commitment towards these aspects, both the public transport aspect through the Bus Priority Fund, which Kirsty spoke about, and also an increasingly momentum towards active travel and getting developments on the ground. When we spoke to Mr. Day, one of the key things he was talking about was the let's just do it type comment. Obviously, we do need to go through proper procedures in terms of assessment, value for money and others. But I think there's a real desire to see things happening as opposed to just continual study after study. So I am optimistic that we could see something within the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
And hopefully Mr. Day and Mr. Harvey, between them, will put some money so that we can just do it, because the cost of this project is not small. and will be quite a challenge, I think, in current times. Rab, I just wonder, looking at the options that are here, the intention would be to go back to the consultants and say, work this up, but there are some elements of it clearly that are never going to fly, and there's no point in pretending that a reproduction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge across the AWPR is going to be viable. So I think we need to give a bit of a steer to the consultants that we're looking for a bridge. We're not looking for anything fancy, and I think probably some caution around the southern option, since it involves two crossings of the 944, which is not what any of us would really want to see. So I wouldn't I wouldn't put a great deal of time and effort into that one. Developing the existing route is not without its challenges, particularly when with a number of traffic lights and so on, and the delays and confusion that can cause. And the northern route has a great many attractions, but is very expensive. But if we can maybe just try and focus them in a little bit, I think that would speed up the process. And there's no point in spending a lot of time on something that's never going to happen. If members across the piece are happy with that, we could maybe ask Rab to give that steer to the consultants when they take this forward. Rab, you're nodding, so that's fine.
Thanks, that's helpful, and certainly something we can take on board. I think the next step would be to be thinking about sieving, to go from the number of options we've got as to what are the most likely in terms of value for money, feasibility, and which ones actually achieve the objectives. So quite happy to take that steer. We do have a seat on the steering group that's looking at the multimodal study, so we as officers can certainly take that steer and input to early meetings. So thank you.
No, it is. I mean, I think it's worth making the point. It is a really important project. If we're looking at active travel between a big and important community right on the edge of Aberdeen and Aberdeen itself that happens to go through some very important industrial areas, this is the project we need to focus on, I think, as we are. So that's really good. But clearly, the costs are not without challenge, and some of the other issues highlighted. Where have we got to? Ian Ross.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You've actually made the point that I was thinking about extremely well. The cost differential, never mind the actual cost, but the 38 million cost differential between a basic bridge and the iconic bridge was just jumping off the page at me. But you've made the point very well. Thank you very much.
That's good. Thank you very much. Excellent. Are there any other comments before we go to the recommendations on this one? I'm just saying that to give me time to scroll down. There we go. There are the recommendations on page 116, and both of them are for noting. So if I put those recommendations forwards, if anyone is not minded to go with them, with the additional comments that have been made around a steer to the consultants, please say so.
No, I would agree with that.
Good. So we have agreement on that one. Thank you very much indeed. And we can move on to the next item, which is 5.1, which is a rail update. Must be Rab, because he's still on my screen.
It's Kelly. I'll switch my screen.
Kelly, I got it wrong.
Thank you, Chair.
I knew I should have given the chair back. There you go. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to give you an update on some of our ongoing rail projects and some consultations that have been coming through over the last couple of months. Board will be well aware of our Inch railway station accessibility study. We are very much at the final hurdle now. We have submitted a revised detailed appraisal report to Transport Scotland, and we're just awaiting their feedback and hopefully approval for that. So it's just really a case of watch the space, and we know that Transport Scotland have received it. They've come back to us to say that they've got it and they'll have a look at it and get back to us. So I'm hoping certainly by our next board that I'll be able to give you an update on that. In terms of the Aberdeen to Lawrencekirk Strategic Corridor Multimodal Study, this is the study that we have had funded through the Local Rail Development Fund, and it is looking at options for rail between Aberdeen and Lawrencekirk, but also options for improving sustainable travel along the A90, A92 corridor. We submitted a case for change to Transport Scotland at the end of last year. We have had feedback from Transport Scotland, which suggested that we needed additional public consultation, which we agreed to do. Unfortunately, when we would have liked to have done that public consultation at the beginning of this year and into the spring, we were obviously in a lockdown situation with the pandemic, and we just didn't feel it was an appropriate time to do public consultation on how people were travelling or thinking about travelling along that corridor. So we are now in a position to go ahead with that public consultation. Transport Scotland have agreed to fund the additional £15,321 to do the consultation. And since I've actually written this report, we're actually going to launch the consultation on Monday. We'll send out a briefing, a link to the survey and all the information to all of our board members, elected representatives, community councils and so on over the next couple of days. And then we'll launch it with a media release and social media to the public on Monday. So again, once we have results of that consultation, which is going to be over a 4-week period finishing around the 18th of October, we'll report back to board and let you know what the results of that consultation are. And then we can put in a revised case for change to Transport Scotland. The next bit of the paper was a ScotRail timetable consultation. This is for May 2022, and I've put in a link to where you can access that report. The main issues around us are that for the ScotRail perspective and for the North East, not a huge amount is changing in terms of timetables. The rest of the country have had a little bit more of a substantial change, but for the North East, we're still broadly having a similar situation of what we currently have. So we are broadly supportive of it. The issues that have been identified, we've put down here in the report, which is around some of the LNER to London services, some issues around Aberdeen to Inverness as well, and some issues around rolling stock and overcrowding. LNER have also put up a consultation for their timetable for 2022, but since they put out the consultation, they've actually now said that that May 2022 timetable is not going to go ahead in May 2022 because of the list of reasons that I've reported there. So I'm expecting that it will probably be December 2022 or later. So we have responded to LNER, but of course they're now saying that the proposed timetable is not going to go ahead as expected in May 2022. We've also just thought it was worth mentioning to board members that there has been some issues with the Caledonian Sleeper. Some services have been cancelled because of staff absence, and we're aware of this, and we're going to be hopefully arranging a meeting with Serco, which is operator of the Caledonian Sleeper, just to get some reassurances around what is happening with the Sleeper. And finally, as anybody who's been to Aberdeen Railway Station recently will know, they are currently going through a major refurbishment of the station, which will include a new ticket office and retail space, which is causing some disruption to passengers in terms of how you actually access the station from Union Square and so on. We've been meeting with ScotRail regularly, and as part of that, we have managed to get assurances that some additional seating on platform 7 north and south, which is the platform that is used for the Montrose to Inverurie service and the Inverness services, the Crossrail services, if you like, because currently there isn't any seating. So that's one of the positives of us having these regular meetings, that we're able to raise issues like that, and they've managed to resolve those issues. So the recommendation to the board is to note the progress on the inch accessibility study and the executive summary in Appendix 1. Note the progress on the multimodal studies, considering the Aberdeen to Lawrencekirk corridor, including the forthcoming community consultation. direct officers to respond to the ScotRail timetable consultation based on the comments provided in this report, note the update from LNER, and note the update on the Aberdeen railway station refurbishment. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I think I'll maybe leave it on permanently. Then you'll hear me muttering under my breath, of course. Thank you all. Sorry, thank you, Kelly. That's really good. There's some real progress there, and I'm particularly pleased, I have to say, to think that we may just get a response from Transport Scotland on the Inch station, which is something that, as this board, we've been and indeed with my Aberdeenshire hat on, we've been pushing for so long, and to think that we may just at our next meeting get a positive response from the powers that be on Inch station and the accessibility will just be a tremendous day. I absolutely agree with the comments you made around the timetable, particularly with the timing of the London train coming in, and there not being any connection for the rest of the bit up to Inverurie and so on. Absolutely right. So happy for those to go forward. And just one thing that I will add, it isn't in the report, was that it's just about a year since Kintore Station opened. And I was asked by the comms, Sandra, our chair, was not able to do. I went along and did some filming with Network Rail as they're marking the 1 year anniversary of that station opening, and it's doing well considering how few people are travelling. Relatively speaking, it's getting a lot of patronage and it's extremely popular in that part of Aberdeenshire. So it's been a huge success already, and I think it can only become more of a success. It's a very beautiful station as well, actually, if you like the modern, sleek-looking, un-Victorian railway stations. It actually looks fabulous as well. Okay, that's me. I will got a couple of people wanting to come in now. So George, over to you first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Kelly, for your comprehensive report. I'm glad to welcome this study into the Southern Corridor to Lormskirk. And as the Chair said, Kintore Station, it is interesting how well supported these stations are when they open, and Lormskirk was the same. But however, I think the timetabling is something which is a real concern, and I know Paul Finch is aware of this, where there's a bit of a dilemma between trying to improve services between Aberdeen and the main cities and delivering for our rural communities, which sometimes mean that they either have to wait at a different station to make connections as opposed to being able to travel directly. So I think we need to always be mindful of our responsibilities for our rural communities as well as the urbanised dwellers too. So no doubt that'll come out in the consultation, but I just raised that just to flag it up because we need to be aware of that, and I'm sure we'll hear more of that in due course. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, George. We'll note those points and move on to Jerry. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Kelly, a really good report. Thank you for that. I just wonder what intelligence we've got about current passenger numbers and predictive passenger numbers, and what, if any, influence that's likely to bear on how the train operators go forward.
Thank you. ScotRail are certainly keeping an eye on their passenger numbers and giving us sort of updates when we meet with them in terms of numbers using the railway. Again, the Northeast has actually done fairly well. I mean, it's not at pre-COVID levels, but certainly compared to the rest of the country, we seem to bounce back in terms of the numbers using the railways quicker than the rest of the country. In terms of other work, we have spoken to Network Rail and ScotRail looking at things like our Aberdeen to Central Belt work as well, and there is some movement within the timetables that if we were to find an appropriate place to have a new station, it could be fitted into a future timetable. So we do have that assurance Obviously, there's no guarantee of that. Obviously, we still need to do all the studies and look at criteria and all that sort of thing, but it's not, in terms of feasibility, it's not impossible. But obviously we're looking at it. Yes, when we're looking at economics and how many passengers, clearly there aren't the numbers of people that were travelling before, but we need to be building a railway for the future. So we need to try and anticipate what that might be in the future and how we can encourage more people out of cars and onto public transport. So hopefully any study we do, that will all be included as part of the study, and hopefully will come out in the consultation as well, what the barriers to travelling by rail or bus or other sustainable modes of transport are. And that's certainly what we're trying to find out in the consultation.
Okay, and will that take into account the change in how people are using public transport as a consequence of COVID and returning back to work, which may not be into offices for many, certainly not on a 5-day-a-week basis?
Yes, certainly what we're seeing at the moment is a much more flat, less peak demand, more people travelling throughout the day rather than at peak times. And as you say, less people having season tickets in terms of travelling 5 days a week, maybe travelling once or twice during the week. And obviously weekend travel has increased as well. We're aware of a lot more leisure travel. So yeah, these are all things that all the rail operators are showing, not just ScotRail, but all of the rail operators are showing an increase in leisure travel rather than business, and a more flat level of travel throughout the day rather than at peak times. So yeah, the world is changing, and all of our studies will reflect that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, a good question for that. Any other points on the rail update? If not, the recommendations are there on page 120. The 5 recommendations, the only one that wants us to do anything other than note is to direct officers to respond to the ScotRail timetable consultation. So those are the recommendations I'm putting forward. If anyone's not minded to accept them, please say so. So they're approved. Kelly, thank you very much. That's a really helpful report, and I'm so looking forward to our next meeting and getting a positive response on each station. It really will be a red letter day if that happens. The progress report. Mr. Finch has come back on my screen, so I'm guessing, Paul, are you doing this one for us? The new look.
Yeah.
New look progress report from the new look Paul Finch. Here we go.
Well, I've got a tie on anyway, Councillor Argyle, so perhaps that could be noted as the new look.
Shaming the rest of us.
Possibly. Yeah, this is a standing item, has been a standing item on our agenda since 2007. I must thank Jenny. Jenny Anderson has done an awful lot of work on this. So I'm just fronting out, but Jenny's the engine behind this. So this has been a standing item where we've tried to sort of highlight the progress, the response on the budget line, just pull things together across the board, not only of Nestrans and Nestrans partnerships. Obviously, with the progression of the new transport strategy, we thought we would try and update the format of it to reflect all the action points in the transport strategy and put progress against it. But following the rule that if it's new, we include it. If nothing's changed, we don't include it, because this particular cycle, everything is new. You will be aware that we've ended up with a very lengthy, almost encyclopedic progress report, which possibly is unwieldy in that respect. But I guess it is important to show what we are doing and where the intent is. What we'll probably say is it's possibly at this point as well worth the question, what do board members value about this report? Not that we want to scrap it. It is almost a case of, do you value it? Is this something that you refer to? And is there any particular information that you would like to see? Or possibly, is there some information here which you think is duplicitous, but not required? So there's a couple of questions there from the officers to the board to sort of catch up on what do you value. And I'm assured the next time we present this board, because it won't all be new, we'll just be presenting on progress, that the length of the report would considerably contract. However, in the meantime, we took the opportunity to perhaps pull out the officer's view of top 10 elements of progress, perhaps to highlight where you might not notice within the 90 odd pages of the progress. And we just sort of say, here's some bits that aren't necessarily otherwise progressed on the agenda. And they range from the good progress we've made recently on the Deeside Way and the Fort Martin and Buchan Way, the community sustainable travel grant we've made to come up with a new grant form and put the money out to the organisations, work on paths, ongoing work on the multimodal corridor studies. Some great work that John Barron, our active cycling officer, has been doing up in Peterhead, working with a range of volunteers in terms of visioning how they would like to see active travel in the future in their community. Discussions with Network Rail on their plans for rail decarbonisation and what that might mean for our local communities. The approval for the strategic business case for the external links to Aberdeen South Harbour associated with the city region deal. Great time at the Get About Village for the Tour of Britain on Sunday. Travel planning support, particularly around the move to the vaccination centre, now John Lewis instead of the former John Lewis instead of the Tecker. And also some really positive breakthrough, I think, with the Scottish Government in terms of the Health and Transport Action Plan, where we've actually now got representatives from the Scottish Government engaging with us with the view to looking at how best practice, probably demonstrated by what we've been doing in the North East for a number of years, could be replicated at a national level. So there's some highlights of progress I thought would take the opportunity to boast about, perhaps, and I'm happy to say that. But the recommendations are note the format of the revised report, but also for the board to advise on any amendment to that format or what you value on this progress report. And so we're happy to take any comments or reflections that board members might have that we can take forward to the next board. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. Thanks very much, Paul. I think it's an interesting one. We've had this, as you said, since 2007, and it very rarely leads to any particular discussion or very rarely even any questions, but that doesn't take away from the importance of it, because there's such a lot happening in the transport field right across the North East, picking up on things the councils are doing, things Nestrans are doing. It's really helpful to have it presented. I do like the idea of just restricting that, if you like, to those things that are new, rather than having things sitting there all the time. That would undoubtedly cut down the length of the paperwork and hopefully make it easier to read and easier to digest. So I think that's a good approach. But I do think it is important for members, not everybody will have read every line, and I'm not going to pretend that we all have, but to have that information to hand about the breadth of the things that are happening and to pick up things that otherwise wouldn't be on the agenda. The ones you've highlighted here, we wouldn't otherwise be looking at or talking about, and could slip by without really the opportunity to raise any questions. So there's an opportunity for that as well. So I think if it's presented in the right way, it's a really positive thing, because we can pick up on items that otherwise wouldn't, and make sure that everyone's up to speed with what's happening, because there's an awful lot going on, no question about that. But I have a couple of people coming in, so I will give priority to the chair of Nestrans. So Sandra, you're first, and then Maggie after that.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I would actually agree with the comments you made. I think it's an incredibly useful resource. I think it's a live document or a live report that should be available to Nestrans board members and others on our website. But it does become a little unwieldy at board meetings. But I don't think it just should be about things that are new. I think it could be also maybe things that have genuinely stalled, that don't come up on the agenda, or even things, if things are not happening or are changing because we're not going to do them anymore. I think that would be useful to pick up going forward. So I think it's a great piece of work, and I would agree with the with you that we just hone in on those things that that happen between committee meetings effectively. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's not just things that are new, it's things that have changed, and that could be changed for the better or otherwise, or change because they're not happening at all. Okay, thanks. Maggie.
Yeah, I know my place. That's why I'm vice chair and not chair, clearly. And also, and I know don't need to say it because Sandra said what I was going to say, which is kind of, yeah, things that are new and reporting by exception. So if something particularly positive or negatives happened, then let us know. But I'll leave it at that.
Can I just come in again, Peter, just to say, I mean, if this is somewhere that is accessible, which I think it should be, there should also be an accessible acronym list to go with it, because there are quite a few acronyms in there that somebody picking it up maybe wouldn't be able to fully get it at first looking. So that would be very useful to have alongside it.
Very good point. Yeah, a glossary. Okay. Any other comments on that item then? If not, we have the recommendations there, which are to note the format and to advise on any amendments. So there's been a couple of, in fact, general agreement really on the direction of travel for that one. And that's it. So the recommendations there, they're on page 138. So if anyone is not happy with that, please indicate. Okay, so that one's approved. Thanks for that, Paul. And we'll move on to publications and consultations. And Rab's back on screen, so I'm going to take a wild guess it's you.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Yeah, publications and consultations. There's a number, many of which are for noting, but there's a couple I would highlight if I may. Decarbonising transport is actually a Department for Transport document. I think possibly in some ways Scotland and the Scottish Government are already ahead of the Department for Transport, but we can see a real push towards decarbonisation both at Scotland and UK level, and something that Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire councils are very much picking up on and want to be seen at the fore and the driving force of. The second one in Appendix 1 relates to Aberdeen's low emission zone. So Nestrans did submit a comment or comments on the proposed low emission zone, which I think the chair and vice chairs approved, and that was submitted. It's there for members' information at Appendix 1. And at Appendix 2, there's an item on workplace parking licensing. I just wanted to emphasise really that's about the regulatory framework for workplace parking licensing. It's not saying we should have it or we shouldn't have it, where it should be or how it should operate in the North East. It's purely about the regulatory framework, about who needs to be consulted if a local authority was to bring forward a scheme, for example. So hopefully it's quite straightforward. The deadline is passed, but Transport Scotland have said if there are further comments from today's board, they would be happy to take them on board. And the others relate to Tactran, who are now in an early stage of developing their regional transport strategy. Obviously, it's an immediate neighbour of ours. We have gone back to them with some issues that relate to transport to and from the North East, particularly on trunk roads, and the whole question about getting through or around Dundee, and in relation to railways through the Tactran area. The others, Aberdeenshire Safety Plan, and an item on the bus elements of the Transport Act are really matters which we haven't come to a conclusion on as yet. The local authorities are giving consideration to things like BSIPs, the statutory partnership question, or franchising about how to operate buses. And I think we felt, let's speak to the local authorities and the Bus Alliance and see if there's anything that we should be adding to their contributions rather than necessarily putting something forward from Nestrans in the first instance. As I say, mostly for noting, but happy to take comments, questions, or any amendments, particularly to Appendix 2 on workplace parking licensing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. There's an awful lot happening at the moment. There's no doubt about that. And it's good to get this report and see where all of these things are. Yeah, just to emphasise the point you made, that the workplace parking licensing is around the regulation of it, and absolutely not whether we are, should, could, would otherwise take it forward in the North East. That's not the issue here. And the response from Aberdeenshire Council went through our last meeting of ISC, and indeed our response to the city on the low emission zone as well. They both went through the last ISC meeting. Very similar response actually to these. So any questions, any comments on any of that? No, if not, the recommendations then we'll deal with that, page 234. So asked to note that approve the submission of the workplace parking licensing consultation response to Transport Scotland, and to note that if following discussions and so on in recommendation 3. So those are the recommendations. If anyone is not minded to accept them, please say so. Good, that's agreed then, and we'll move on with thanks to Rab to the information bulletin, which I think is you again, if I remember correctly.
I'll start us off anyway, Chair. Thank you. Again, mostly for noting, but a couple of points I might pick up if I may. Appendix 1 is the summary of press and communications, and again, as you said on the previous item, there is a lot going on. We've certainly been involved in a few media releases, etc. Appendix 2 is our most up-to-date survey relating to COVID and the changing travel patterns, which Jerry spoke about. How are things changing? And we're trying to keep an eye on how things are returning, whether to normal or a new normal or a completely different change going forward. I also wanted to mention, particularly under the Get About section, 2 elements, if I may. One is that Grampian Cycle Partnership, in conjunction with Nestrans, the local authorities, Police Scotland and others, have produced a good cycling guide. I think it's something that's been lacking for a while, something produced by cyclists for cyclists about how to be courteous on the road. And I think it's also useful for drivers, but Police Scotland, I think, are finding it handy as something that they can give out or link people to think about their behaviour and making sure that people are safe and courteous when cycling or when driving and dealing with cyclists. And the other one was the Tour of Britain. We should not mention the fact that the Tour of Britain, I think, was a very successful day on Sunday, from a start in Stonehaven over much of the countryside of Aberdeenshire, and then into Aberdeen with the finish at the beach esplanade. There was also a Get About village, so promotional aspects around cycling and promoting sustainable travel in relation to that. And just wanted to mention really that everything I've heard so far is what a success it was, how well organised it was, and the fact that they will be coming back next year for departure actually from Aberdeen. It'll be stage 1 rather than stage 8. But the whole question of legacy, how the North East will benefit from that in the long term, I think in terms of the image of cycling, the priority it's been given and the high profile it's given to cycling in the area is really critical and important. So the report's for noting, but I wanted to highlight these few things for members. Thank you.
No, thanks, Rob. I'd certainly echo the comments you made there about the Tour of Britain. A fantastic success for the North East, and a huge amount of work that went into it, and by jingo, that work paid off. And it's been a really difficult one. A huge amount of uncertainty whether the event would be able to go ahead, doing it all in the COVID environment, and all of that. It made it very challenging, but everybody responded to that challenge, and it really was a fantastic success. And I know, Maggie, you were up watching part of it up on the Cairn Mount, so I'll ask you to come in a moment and tell us about that, so that you can get back your feeling of importance. So no, it was great. And what I think is really positive is that it's coming back next year, going the other way around, starting in Aberdeen, finishing in Stonehaven, presumably, and another opportunity to really show what the North East can do and what we're all about. So it's really exciting. Yeah, that's me. Maggie, do you want to talk about the top of the Cairn Mount?
Yeah, I'm not sure I ever felt important, Peter, so you haven't made me feel even less important, so that's okay. Yeah, I went to the top of the Cairn Mount to watch it, and I have to say it was an incredible atmosphere. There were masses of people up there, but what I found particularly interesting was the number of people that had walked up. So it wasn't all just idiots like me trying to cycle up Cairn Mount, which isn't a great idea, really. It was people of all shapes and sizes and ages, and it gave me the impression it was people out watching cycling who wouldn't necessarily either cycle themselves or even normally watch it, but somehow this had captured their attention. There was a guy up there playing very loud music, which if you stood in front of it was really annoying, but if you stood behind it, it was great party atmosphere. Giant lobsters dancing, not real giant lobsters, people dressed up as lobsters. Yeah, all kinds of great stuff happening, and despite having to be up there for a couple of hours, it felt great. Really, really good.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for that. Yeah, I don't think you'll catch me cycling up the Cairn Mount, so I admire the fact that you did. Sandra.
Yeah, thanks. I was down at the Esplanade. I was there at quite near the finishing line. It was just so exciting because we had the big screen, so we could get a bird's eye view of what was happening in the Shire, and then of course seeing Aberdeen in all its glory from the helicopter was just tremendous. There was a real sense of excitement in the crowd, and a real range of people there, and lots of kids, and went down to the Get About village and had a look around the stalls, and there was stunts section, and yeah, lots of people trying different things and so on. So there really was a real carnival atmosphere down at the beach, and yeah, it was just such a huge success, and as everybody's saying, we really need to build on that, and to make sure that cycling gets what it deserves, because there are more and more people using their bikes, and I was happy to see actually the e-bike Fargo Cargo down at the Esplanade as well. So which of course is one that came through in our e-cargo bike update as well. So yeah, really excellent event.
Now, my only disappointment with it was that my son, bless him, decided that it was a good weekend not to be well. So I was stuck at home all weekend and saw none of it. But there you go, that's life. Next year, it will be a different story. Good. Okay. Any other comments on the information bulletin? If not, we can note that and move on to conferences and presentations. Is next. So, Brab, you're still here, so I think you're conferencing and presenting for us.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a regular update to keep board members aware of conferences that have taken place or are coming up soon. As you can see, there are a number that we've been involved in. All have been online in the recent period, and all at no cost. So I think we're benefiting from the fact that we don't need to travel to Edinburgh, Glasgow and beyond for conferences at the moment. And actually there's some really good value conferences there which we can attend from the comfort of our own bedrooms, offices or kitchens. So but there's still quite a lot going on. It's interesting that things seem to be changing in terms of conferences becoming very much an online activity nowadays.
Yeah, and correspondingly a lot less travel right across the piece. So indeed, yeah. And particularly for the international conferences, it becomes a very attractive proposition, I should say. Yeah, okay. Thanks for that. I'm not seeing any indications, so we can note that and move on to pending business and reports for future meetings.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. The pending business, I think the key one is obviously Kirsty has spoken about a real desire to get the final regional transport strategy back to the next meeting of the board. So work very hard on that, and we will look at monitoring and delivery aspects around that as well. I also think that there's probably an opportunity for us to bring forward something about electric vehicles. It seems to be very much the high profile aspect just now, and we'll see maybe if we can get someone from Energy Savings Trust to come and speak to the board at a future meeting about EVs and their role in the decarbonising of transport going forward. So happy to look at other aspects as well if members have anything they want to bring forward.
Okay. Any comments for Rab on that? Okay. In that case, that's the end of the public section of the meeting. I think we probably need to agree to take item 11 in private. So I'll just put that as a proposal. There is item 11, which is the Aberdeen Rapid Transit Options Appraisal and Business Case Tender Award. And the proposal is that we take that in private. If anyone is not minded to agree with that, please say so. Okay, in that case, that brings